Hey everybody, welcome back to RotoCurve.com. As always, I'm Josh Collacchi, and today we're here to discuss NFL Week 8 DFS on FanDuel. We're going to get right into talking about cash picks. So let's just keep in mind we're going to be talking about cash games only here. These are most players that I like that are safe, guys that I feel are worth putting in your cash games for this week. We will have another video later on discussing some GPP plays, so stay tuned for that. So let me just bring you up this screenshot of the PowerPoint slideshow, and we'll get right up underway. All right, as you guys can see, the first guy I like on FanDuel, especially in cash games, every week seems to be Phillip Rivers and Carson Palmer, who you can see here. Now, the reason why I like Rivers this week is because he's been one of the most productive quarterbacks in the NFL this season. He also has a good matchup, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But considering the fact that only 3 quarterbacks available on this slate have more fantasy points per game, and of course we saw what Phillip Rivers was able to do in the second half in Week 7, it gives him a very high ceiling, but that's not what I'm targeting here, especially for cash games. I'm targeting his high floor. And what I mean by that is he has a high floor and a safe floor because he has 2 or more touchdowns in all but 1 game this season. He leads the NFL in passing attempts, so you know you're going to see a ton of volume from that passing game. And considering his matchup against Baltimore, who has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks this season, he makes for an excellent matchup. Now, if you did not want to spend $8,500, there are some 2 guys that are a little bit cheaper that I also don't mind using in cash games as well. The first guy is Andy Dalton at $8,100 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Dalton, like Rivers, has been one of the most productive quarterbacks in all of the NFL this season. He actually leads in all of the available quarterbacks for this given slate at 23.3 FanDuel points per game. Now, he has 18 FanDuel points in every game, and he has 2 or more touchdowns in all but 1 game. Now, what that means is he also has a very safe floor. Now, the reason why I like Rivers over him is because his matchup's a little bit better as the Bengals and Andy Dalton face the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have struggled against good quarterbacks so far this season, but they've done well against some other quarterbacks as well. So I like Rivers the most, but with Andy Dalton right behind him, it's not a bad option to go down to him, which is $8,100. Another guy at $8,100 is a guy you've heard me talk a lot about before, and that's Carson Palmer. The reason why I like Palmer is basically the same reason as Rivers and Dalton. It's because of his consistency. He has 17 or more FanDuel points in every game this season, and he scored 18 or more in all 1 game. So the one thing about Palmer is he doesn't have a massive upside of 30 or 40 points, but he gets you 17 or more, usually in the low 20s, pretty much each and every week. He does have a good matchup in the Browns, simply because they've only faced 1 passing team this season, and that's the San Diego Chargers, who threw for 358 yards and 3 touchdowns. So Palmer has a little bit of a sneakier matchup. It is a good matchup, but you have to dig into it a little bit more because Cleveland's numbers are actually good against the pass, but you have to look at the entire situation, and that situation is they got shredded by Phillip Rivers. So in order for quarterbacks, I like Rivers, then Dalton, then Carson Palmer. Personally, I'll be building my cash games quarterbacks lineups around Phillip Rivers. Let's move on to running backs. 3 guys here, and normally you're looking for Devontae Freeman, but we've gotten to the point where we don't really need to discuss him. Of course, he's a top option simply because of the volume he's gotten. He scored a ton of touchdowns. He leads the NFL in rushing, and he makes for a good play each and every week. But let's talk about some other guys. First guys I want to discuss is Justin Forsett for the Baltimore Ravens against San Diego Chargers. I noticed 7,000 on FanDuel. He makes for a good option because his cap room is just not going to crush you. His price is not going to crush your cap room, rather. And he has a very good matchup against the Chargers, who have allowed at least 100 rushing yards in each of the last 6 games. San Diego has allowed close to 30 FanDuel points per game. You can see here 29.2 FanDuel points per game to opposing running backs. And to see this, we've on RotoCurve.com, we've made a tool under the quarterbacks or running backs or wide receiver fantasy points against. You can select it by position, and you can see how each team is allowed in opposing FanDuel points. So be sure to check that out as well. That's exactly how I found that San Diego has allowed close to 30 FanDuel points per game to opposing running backs, and that makes for a great matchup for Forsett. Now, Forsett has been very good of late. He's had 11.9 FanDuel points in each of his last 4 games, 11.9 FanDuel points or more, rather. He has a 25-point burst and a good matchup against the Browns a few weeks ago. Now, That bodes well because this week, as we discussed, San Diego is also a very good matchup. So for Forsett having success in a good matchup before, it gives them a better chance to have a better matchup again this time against San Diego Chargers, who have a similar defense as the Browns in terms of rushing defending. The next guy is Chris Johnson, who honestly, I can't really believe how well he's playing, but he's playing very well. He seems to have found the fountain of youth in Arizona. He's second in the NFL in rushing with just under 570 yards. He's averaging 5 yards a carry, and he has another good matchup this week against the Cleveland Browns, who we just talked about when we were discussing Forsett. Forsett scored 25 FanDuel points against him. I think Chris Johnson could come somewhere close to that. The one thing about Chris Johnson and the Arizona Cardinals is Bruce Arians likes to use the other running backs and Andre Ellington and David Johnson, but Ellington's a little bit in the doghouse. You heard Arians talk about earlier this week that he didn't like the way he went out of bounds late in the game. And, of course, when anybody is young or is a rookie in Arians' system like David Johnson, he doesn't touch the ball much. So I don't think there's a big issue with Johnson's volume. I think he's going to see most of the touches. And then a good matchup against Cleveland, who have allowed just under 27 FanDuel points per game to opposing running backs. It makes for an excellent option at 7,300. And I think he's going to be a little bit lesser owned in cash simply because he is Chris Johnson, and a lot of people are weary on him because of his past few years. But he's been excellent this year, and I have no problem rolling him out there in cash games in a very good matchup. And the third guy, if you don't like either of the top two I like, are Doug Martin against the Atlanta Falcons at 7,500 on FanDuel. Martin has been unbelievable in the last few weeks. He's notched 18.6 FanDuel points or more in each of the last 3 games. And his touches, his volume has been insane lately. It's at least 22 touches in 4 of 6 games. He's had 100 or more yards in 3 consecutive contests. And really just everything has been going in his favor. But what about the matchup? Well, that goes in his favor again this week as well as he faces the Atlanta Falcons, who have given up 10 rushing touchdowns already this season and have allowed over 27 FanDuel points per game to opposing running backs. So Martin has pretty much every box checked. The only thing that I have him as my third running back for cash is simply because his price is higher than those other 2 guys. But it ends up being worth it because of all the touches he gets. Moving on to wide receivers, I think it's time to roster Antonio Brown again. Ben Roethlisberger is back, and of course, you saw that massive streak that Brown had of, I believe it was 33 games before it got snapped, of 5 catches and 50 yards or more. Of course, that ended when Roethlisberger went down, but when Big Ben was here in the beginning of the season, Antonio Brown scored 23.8, 32, and 16.3 FanDuel points. In games with Big Ben on the shelf, he only scored 6.7, 6, 3.9, and then he had 16 last week. So that tells you when Big Ben's active, it makes Antonio Brown a huge play, and he will be active this week. And I really like Brown at 8,400 because he's a bit of a discount compared to those other top receivers like Odell Beckham Jr., like Julio Jones, and guys like DeAndre Hopkins as well. So I think you're going to take advantage of Antonio Brown at his price this week, and I'm comfortable rolling him out in cash, even with Big Ben's first game back. The matchup is against the Bengals, who have allowed at least 20 FanDuel points to receivers in each of the last 5 games. And considering this the divisional matchup, we've seen Antonio Brown torch the Bengals before. So I do like this matchup. I do like his price, and I think he's worth rolling out in cash games as a safety option. The next guy is one of the safest options out there to me, and that's Keenan Allen for the San Diego Chargers, faces the Baltimore Ravens. Last week, there was injury speculation about he aggravated a groin injury in the previous week, but he kind of shut that down with 9 catches for 89 yards. He looked very good against the Raiders, although they did end up losing that game. But with Antonio Gates hampered by a knee injury, he didn't play last week, and he may play. He's likely to play this week, but I just can't see him being as healthy as he was. I expect Allen to be a huge target monster and continuing to see catches. He already has 62 catches in 7 games this year. And why that's huge in FanDuel cash games is simply because he's getting those fantasy points. If you get 7 or 8 catches, that's just a floor of 4 fantasy points right there, not to mention the yards and the possible touchdowns you can get as well. Now, pairing those 2 things with the fact that Allen has an unbelievable matchup against the Ravens, who have allowed over 38 FanDuel points per game to opposing receivers. And, of course, with Allen being the number 1 receiver by far in San Diego, he's going to see most of those targets and most of those catches. And that's exactly what you want to see for a guy that you want to use in cash games on FanDuel, a wide receiver. Now, those two guys are expensive, so some cheaper guys I want to discuss real quick are Eric Decker and Michael Crabtree. They're facing each other, of course, on both different sides of the ball. But the reason why I like Decker against the Oakland Raiders is simply because he's been so consistent this season, which is odd because coming into this year, Eric Decker was a high floor or low floor, high ceiling guy. I mean, he could score 2 or 3 touchdowns in a game. But this year, he's been really consistent. He's caught at least 4 passes in each of the last 4 games. In 5 games this season, Decker's caught a touchdown, 4 of them. He scored no less than 10.7 FanDuel points in each game. So this guy is under 7,000 pretty much every week. I think he was under 6,000 one week as well. He's given you double-digit fantasy points, which is all you can ask for. He faces a Raiders defense that has allowed 88 catches, over 1,100 yards, for an average of close to 15 catches per game. Now, considering that Brandon Marshall's on the other side, he will see some targets taken away from him. But considering that Decker has been very consistent this year, I can definitely see him kind of matching his value again against Oakland, who's very good against the run but struggles against the pass. So I expect him to see a lot of targets from Ryan Fitzpatrick. The last guy in cash games for wide receiver that I'm looking at this week is Michael Crabtree, 5,700 against the Jets. Of course, he's the most risky of all 4 of these guys, but at his price, I think he's worth putting out there, and I'll tell you why. Amari Cooper is going to be shadowed on the other side by Darrelle Revis, and that means that he's probably not going to see as many targets as he has. Of course, he's an excellent receiver, but usually quarterbacks tend to stay away from guys like Revis. That means a receiver on the other side, which is Crabtree in this case, is going to be open a lot, and he's going to have an opportunity to be one-on-one. Now, Crabtree has actually been really productive so far this season. He has 4 catches in each and every game. He has over 5.6 FanDuel points in each game this season, and I know that sounds like a small total, but at 5,700, that tells you that he's actually had a rather safe floor. So considering the fact that he should see a lot of targets, not seeing Darrelle Revis, I think he makes for a very cheap option that you can use in cash games, but don't expect a massive game. I just don't think he's going to get you 2 or 3 points. I think he's going to be able to get you in either the high single digits or low double digits and that's really what you need at 5,700. Moving on to tight end, there are 2 guys I like this week in cash games, and the first one is Tyler Eifert. Of course, Rob Gronkowski plays on Thursday this week, which really makes tight end a little bit more of a puzzle this week. Normally, a lot of people just see Gronkowski and they plug him in their lineups, and honestly, I can't fault you for doing so. But this week, considering he plays on Thursdays, you won't be able to do so if you're just playing on a Sunday slate. That's why I like Eifert, because he has a very good upside, and it's actually been rather safe this year as well, with the exception of the 1 game against the Ravens where he didn't catch any passes. So far this year, he has 28 catches for 342 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's averaging 14 FanDuel points per game, and he faces the Steelers in Week 8, who have allowed the 3rd most FanDuel points per game to opposing tight ends. Now, that being said, as you see here, and if you've looked at the opposing defenses, you've seen that most of the production against the Steelers in terms of tight ends has come in 2 games, with the Gronkowski scoring 3 touchdowns and Antonio Gates scoring 2 touchdowns. But the reason why I think this is a good matchup and why I use that fantasy points against that for this particular situation is because Tyler Eifert's skill set is very similar to Gates and Gronkowski. Of course, he's not measuring up right now to 2 future Hall of Famers, but it just shows you that he's a good pass catcher. He works well in seams. And considering that both of those guys, or all 3 of those guys, have similar skill sets, I think it'll be a good job for Eifert to potentially see a lot of those undersized linebackers in the middle of the field, and that's exactly what Andy Dalton will target in terms of a mismatch. The last guy I like at tight end is Martellus Bennett. Bennett should continue to see a ton of targets from Jay Cutler simply because of all the depletions to the Chicago Bears passing attack. Alshon Jeffrey is back, but considering the fact that Bennett has been targeted basically more than any other tight end except for Rob Gronkowski this year, as you can see at 8.8 targets per game, it tells me that he's the top option in that passing game when they're not looking at Alshon Jeffrey. Now, they're playing Minnesota this week, and of course, if you've watched Minnesota play, you know they have an excellent cornerback by the name of Xavier Rhodes, who I expect to shadow Alshon Jeffrey all game. So with Jeffrey seeing a tough matchup in the inroads, I think that makes Martellus Bennett an excellent number 2 option who should be targeted a lot. Minnesota has actually not been very good against tight ends this season. They've given up 12.53 FanDuel points per game to these tight ends. And considering that defense has been very good everywhere else, this is the one way to exploit them. And I think he's going to see those targets increase, as we just discussed with Alshon Jeffrey being on Xavier Rhodes. That wraps up our cash game picks for NFL on FanDuel for this week. Thanks for watching. As always, give us a thumbs up so we continue to bring you analysis each and every week. And also go over to RotoCurve.com. There's a ton of free tools. There's new stuff coming every day. You can see free analysis. There's a great community of daily fantasy players willing to discuss lineups, information, and everything you need to use for the upcoming week in NFL daily fantasy sports. So check it all out and be sure to give us a thumbs up. And let's make this week, week 8, and the rest of our season a profitable one on FanDuel on an NFL DFS. Good luck, everybody.